every country in the world, you have what you can call the revolutionary intelligentsia. And that's a group of people that are like college professors, young people, intellectuals, and they're usually from somewhat privileged backgrounds. And they get into anarchism or Trotskyism or some kind of revolutionary ideology that's more about aesthetics and emotions and libidinal release. And that doesn't represent everyone in the country who might want socialism.
Para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando. Viva la revolución.
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
I was looking at some research on the socialist movement of Kazakhstan. I saw that previously they were with the Trotskyist International. I found that to be really interesting. What are your thoughts on the left in Kazakhstan and in Eurasia after the Soviet Union? What are some of the splits, especially when it comes to like China and Russia?
Well, I attended the World Conference of Parliamentarians that was held in Moscow. And I actually met government officials from Kazakhstan, and I heard them give speeches warning about the danger of color revolutions and how social media could be whipped up for it. And that was before the pandemic. That was a while back. So they on some level, there was some knowledge that something like this might be in the future. But it's very interesting that, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has put out a statement. And from what I understand, they have said that on the one hand, they obviously condemn, the instability and the violence, but they want to separate it from the peaceful protests, about price caps. And that, again, Kazakhstan was once ruled by a communist party. I mean, it was a Soviet republic that had an official communist party. And many of the government officials, if not all of them, are people that have some kind of family relationship, or their parents were in that communist party, or they themselves were officials in that communist party. So Marxism is very influential there. Now, obviously, the Marxist groups, groups that are out there calling themselves Marxists, is a little bit different than the influence of Marxism. And that's one thing that I kind of urge leftists around the world to kind of make the distinction. But you're gonna in every country in the world, you have what you can call the revolutionary intelligentsia. And that's a group of people that are like college professors, young people, intellectuals, and they're usually from somewhat privileged backgrounds. And they get into anarchism or Trotskyism or some kind of revolutionary ideology that's more about aesthetics and emotions and libidinal release. And that doesn't represent everyone in the country who might want socialism, right? That doesn't represent everyone in the country who wants a better life. And you saw for yourself that in the Bolivarian countries, that's not, the base of Hugo Chavez and Maduro. That's not the base of Rafael Correa in Ecuador. So it's important to distinguish. You might hear a statement from some group that's aligned with the Fifth International or the Fourth International. That group probably has less than 1,000 members, okay? But the amount of people in the country that take Marxism seriously, that respect and honor the Soviet Union, that probably look up to Stalin, the bulk of those people are not involved with those organizations. And so you have to make that distinction.
That's a great point, because when I lived in Ecuador, me and Ophelia lived in Ecuador, it was a very interesting dynamic, because a lot of the groups, exactly like you said, that had the name communist or Marxist or proletarian in the name, they sided with the right wing against Correa. There was a communist party that was led by a lot of private school, petty bourgeois kids who were kind of anarchisty or Maoist. And they had signs that said, "Down with Correísmo," who was Rafael Correa, the president, left-leaning, an amazing president, one of my favorite presidents. And they had a sign that said, "Vote for Lasso." Lasso is the current president of Ecuador, who's a neoliberal banker from Guayaquil, from the coast, right-wing as hell. And I was so confused, because they had like hammer and sickles and red flags and all that. And it says, "Vote for Lasso, down with Correísmo." And then they had like Marxists and communists and proletarian in their name. And then you talk to Korea's followers, the base of the Korea fan supporters, and they're taxi drivers. They're really working class people, and some of them even didn't have necessarily far left views. They viewed it in terms of development, very nuts and bolts. It was like, Korea improved my standard of living. I'm making more money. I'm better able to provide for my family. They weren't even necessarily like these ideological Marxists talking about Gramsci and sipping lattes at a cafe. Like, they were cab drivers, they were like street vendors, and they supported Korea. But the dynamic in Ecuador was that the petty bourgeois left, ultra left people, they saw them as right wing and Korea as right wing. But then they were left wing and they were in alliance with the neoliberal bankers. So I totally agree with you, man. We can't rely on labels and names. And I think a lot of times people get so fixated on that. They're like, oh, well, the Communist Party or the Socialist Party of this says that. So is that I'm a communist? So I guess they're right, but they're not. And I think that's definitely an issue, especially in countries that have already gone through the process of socialist revolution, where you have a lot more of those contradictions that take place. Same in Nicaragua as well. There's a group in Nicaragua called MRS, like the Sandinista re-innovation movement, that claims to be even more radical than the FSLN and the Sandinistas, but they're like pro-empire. So it's crazy. It's just it's really interesting to think about that.